Hey guys, Shane McMurray from The Wedding Report. In this episode, I meet with Brian Laird. He's a lawyer in Tucson, Arizona. And I had previously scheduled Brian to talk about defamation of character online regarding reviews. But given today's situation with coronavirus, I also threw in some situations around cancellations, basically chargebacks, and then future issues with maybe waivers and things like that for viruses. So great episode. Check it out. Brian, thanks for taking the time to do this. Appreciate it. Tell me about your business. Tell me where you're located. Give us your website address.
Sure.
How long you've been doing this?
Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
I'm really happy to be here. So I'm an attorney in Tucson, Arizona. Brian Laird. Our website is blaird.com, BLAIRD.com. I'm a lawyer here in Tucson. I deal with a lot of commercial kinds of cases. Some of them go over into areas of defamation of a business, this kind of thing, which is, I know, something you were interested in. I would be happy to talk about. And I'd say probably 70 or 80% of what I do is just one business or another in a fight. You know, they're in a legal conflict. Some of those are arbitrations, some of them are mediations, some of them are just people who haven't really gotten started yet, but need guidance on how to deal with a conflict. And a lot of the times lately, you know, more and more with social media, we're having to deal with the implications of social media, review websites, that kind of thing.
Yep.
And the impacts that things that people say can have on a business.
Yeah. Yeah. Brian, how long have you been doing this?
20 years.
Wow. That's great.
You
don't look like you've been doing it for 20 years, bro.
It seems like it was just 30 years ago that I started.
Yeah. So one of the things I wanted to talk about was the defamation of character thing. And a lot of times I see online, you start reading and people, will bash other businesses and just, say stuff about them that's not necessarily true, or it could be true, but a lot of times I think people just get upset and get mad and they just throw stuff on there.
Right.
So when people do that, it impacts the business, right? Pretty significantly, or it could, because a lot of customers will read reviews. They'll base their opinions on the business based on what other customers have written about them. So let's talk a little bit about what defamation of character really is and how businesses can protect themselves, or anything else you want to talk about this, because you've done quite a few of these.
Yeah. Okay. So I have. One thing I always like to tell my clients, by the way, is just remember the trolls come out at night. So whatever happens, when you wake up tomorrow and look online at that review website, you may find something you never expected. Defamation generally is a false defamatory statement. It's a statement that's not true, and that tends to harm the reputation of the person or business that it's said about. There are way too many nuances to defamation and business disparagement for me to really go into it in a short video chat.
Sure.
But the long and the short of it is, if somebody's getting online and they're posting false statements about you or your business, you're probably getting into the defamation zone, and you're going to have to deal with it as a business one way or the other. One thing that I often counsel clients about, and a lot of the times what I'm doing is counseling as opposed to, getting up on the horse and riding, and going for it. And if you're a business, I generally tell people, and your lawyer is not talking to you long and hard about all of the effects of being involved in a litigation, and it's just saying, yeah, let's go file a lawsuit. Let's go file an arbitration claim. You may want to get a second opinion. One thing I like to tell people as a business is if you're getting into a conflict, especially a legal conflict with a former customer or a client, even with another business, say, who's stealing your clients or customers, there is a toll in terms of time, concentration, effort
Yeah.
that goes into being a business owner who's involved in a lawsuit. So I always tell, first thing I do when I'm talking to a client who comes in, they say their business being defamed, is to say, are there ways we can deal with this without going into full litigation mode that will get you to where the least harm is done to your business and where the most opportunity continues to exist for you to engage in your business? Because it really can be like a part-time job to be a business owner and be suing a former client, a former customer, another business. So do you want to take on a part-time job in addition to your owner's duties for the next year and a half? That's what you need to be able to say, yes, it means that much to me before you do.
Well, and it's not like you're working a part-time job to earn any money either, right? It's like you're going to be paying money for this part-time job that you're working, right?
Exactly. And most of the time with these kinds of cases, what you're looking for is really a result. And typically that result is not going to be in the end that you're going to get a bunch of money from the other side. So the standard, kind of conflict that happens is that a business gets a crazy customer and they've bent over backwards trying to deal with this person and trying to please them. And then ultimately, that customer has gone to another business, a competitor, or has canceled their contract, whatever they've done. And then that customer decides, well, now I want to take my pound of flesh and I'm going to do that online. And I'm going to go to every single review site that I can find, whether it's search engines, whether it's those review websites that exist just to post reviews. And I'm not just going to post one review. I'm going to post every day for a month, right?
Yeah.
So the first thing to do is to communicate with the website that you're dealing with, and some of those are better than others, right?
Yeah.
Some of those review websites will work with businesses more easily than, say, social media website. And, the big social media websites, it's impossible almost to get any kind of response out of there, short of there's been a lawsuit filed, you're sending out a subpoena, this kind of thing.
Yeah.
So with that, the ultimate goal usually is, how can I convince this person on the other side to take down their posts on their own, right?
Yeah.
If you can't get the review website to take them down, then you're left with, do I threaten the lawsuit here? And is it worth the time and trouble to, go into a lawsuit with this person? And I would say to a business, most of the time it's not. So it's only the really exceptional times when you feel that a person is posting in such a way that it may be having, you really think it does have a material impact on your business.
Right.
That's the only time you're going to think about going and suing them. And the first, I think, generally the first response should be to say, how can I respond to this as a comment to their comment in such a way that, without saying, hey folks, this person's crazy, or hey folks, this is just a person with too much time on their hands who wants to hurt my business for all the wrong reasons. You don't want to say those things directly, but you certainly can post in such a way that says, let's think about what this person is saying.
Yeah.
And if there's anything there that's real, let me respond to it with, here's what we do.
Yeah.
Here's how we've tried to respond to your problem that you've raised. Here's what we've been willing to change to try to adjust for you. I think that if you show that kind of response to most people, then unless you've got, 40 out of 50 reviews are 1 stars, then people look at it and they say, oh, well, that was one crazy person and look,
Yeah.
they left a good responsive message. That's all people expect.
Yeah.
One
Agree with
thing,
that. Yeah, for sure.
one thing that I have to oftentimes counsel clients about is, look, this seems extremely personal to you. It feels personal. It is. This is this small business that you've built maybe from nothing. Maybe you opened your business on a credit card with a lease signed, right?
Yeah.
And it feels like somebody's attacking a family member, your child. And so the first reaction to that often is really large emotion.
Yeah.
It's strong emotion. And I oftentimes have to counsel people, look, let's step back and look at how, just an ordinary person who's scrolling through a search engine looking for reviews of whatever business, a wedding business.
Yeah.
Let's think about how this looks to them. Because if the post or review is so over the top crazy, and part of what I do is saying to a person, look, let me give you my thought about this. If I saw this review, and if what I see is crazy, then I say, let's not make, the crazy person, let's not give them more airtime, right?
Yeah.
If what I see is, hey, that person's got a legitimate beef, maybe you as a business owner should think about this a little bit.
Yeah.
And then maybe if we can adjust the process here, address that issue, and then come back and say, you know what, ignoring the fact that you used all of this vitriolic language, we come back and we ignore that and say, you know what, we thought about what you said and we've changed this. And you're welcome back if you want to try us with this difference made or not, know.
Yeah, that makes sense. There's got to be like a fine line though between what's really defamation versus, because you talked about if they're saying something about you that's untrue, but how do you prove that that's untrue, right? Like, I mean, because people could say anything.
Yeah,
they can say anything. So what's the fine line there?
Yeah, interesting area, which is generally you do have to allege and prove that a statement is false. But proving the truth of the matter asserted is actually what we call an affirmative defense. So what happens is that you file a lawsuit and you've said, this person made these false, disparaging statements about my business. They did it intentionally. They knew it would cause harm to my business. We've suffered as a result. We've lost customers as a result.
Yeah.
Now the other side, actually, as an affirmative defense, okay, can say, you're going to lose this case because we're going to prove that what we said was true. So that's more often the way you see that issue come up, is that the other side, the defendant, asserts that as a defense. It's also an issue that people need to think about when they're deciding whether to file a lawsuit or not, right? So along with the other factors we've talked about before, one thing I counsel people about often is when you are filing a lawsuit for defamation, you are inviting the other side to prove that what they said was true. So think about that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And if they have a lawyer and they want to spend the money to do that, and they want to send out a bunch of subpoenas, and they want to collect emails and communications, text messages, you want to look into everything that's going on, do you really want to motivate somebody to try to work hard to prove the truth of an assertion that you don't like in the first place? So is it sometimes better to simply have a reasonable response that undercuts and takes out the power of what they're saying, sort of lets the air out of their balloon? Is that better than saying, I'm going to sue you and I'm going to give you a motivation to try to prove what you say is true? Now, a lot of times clients will say, well, it's false, so they can't, so they can't prove it.
Yeah.
And I say, okay. And I'm not telling you that you're not right,
Yeah.
but a lawyer's going to show up on the other side, and
Yeah.
he's going to do all that he can, as long as they pay him or her, to try to prove the truth of this. And even if they can't do it, is that something you want somebody spending their time and energy on? Because every step that they take in this lawsuit, where they're asserting that what they said that was lousy about you to begin with,
Yeah.
every step they take that they try to prove that's true, if you didn't like it the first time, it's going to feel bad every time it happens.
Yeah.
So be realistic,
Yeah.
about that and the impact on you, your health, your well-being, all of that.
Yeah. So do clients or people have responsibility in their response to reviews online? Like when they put a review, is there something that they should be thinking about from a defamation perspective outside of what you've said as a customer of that business or a client of that business, and I'm going to go bash them? Should I be thinking twice before I do something like that?
So, yeah, you definitely should be thinking about what you're saying, and particularly if you're dealing with somebody who's not. And, one thing that I think people need to do is just take a breath and just not react emotionally and say, what am I trying to accomplish here? And how do I sort of take the air out of the other side's sails? Now, if you're dealing with somebody who themselves is very emotionally charged, is coming from a sort of irrational place, if you hit them back in a personal way, that's oftentimes what they're looking for to motivate them to try to attack you on every other website in the world and make this their lifelong, goal of getting back at you.
Yeah.
So, a lot of the times what I end up telling people is let's figure out how we don't feed that bad energy on the other side.
And it's easy to do. Yeah.
Yeah. By pushing back against it too hard. Yeah. And if in particular, I think people need to be reminded when they're dealing with these situations that you're really not talking, or you shouldn't be talking to the person on the other side of that post. You should be talking to the audience, whatever it is that's listening to this. So, if you say things that are personal and are insulting and are disparaging back to that other person, what you may end up with is more posts that are more negative on more websites, and everything's worse than it was when you first responded.
Yeah.
If you respond by saying something that is very benign in terms of the other person, is not any kind of a personal response to them, but also deals with the factual information that you need to get to any other reviewer.
Yeah.
That's who you're talking to. You're talking to the other reviewer or the reader of the review.
Yeah. Yeah. So, given today's situation with coronavirus, you and I had talked about some other situations that come up, given that, right? Which, a couple of them are like people are canceling, people may do chargebacks because you want to cancel and they don't. So let's talk a little bit about like contract cancellations. And how does that impact people? I think what we talked about, so some people may not have contracts. I hope they do. But the ones that have contracts, and someone comes to them and say, hey, I want to cancel, what do they need to be aware of as a business to have in their contracts when someone comes, when they want to cancel? If someone calls you, if a customer or client calls you and say, hey, I want to cancel, what should you have in your contract as a business? And what could protect you for situations like we're experiencing today?
Well, so typically what you think of, you actually look at it from the other perspective, which is what will relieve a party of a contract and to their duty to perform. And that's usually talked about as what's called a force majeure clause, which is sort of an act of God clause. If something happens, a hurricane, that makes it impossible to perform under this contract, is one side or the other relieved of the duty to perform. Okay. So if you have a force majeure clause in there, certainly if you're the business, you would want to make sure that it didn't relieve a customer of the duty to go through with it, based on, in this case, a pandemic, right?
Yeah.
Clauses like that, it varies state to state. So, what the specific rules are with regard to how to draft one of those, you really have to go on a state by state basis. And that's the kind of thing that the contract lawyers have taken lots of time to, over a course of a career, to draft a contract based on the different decisions of the courts. During their career. I guess I'd back up, and the first thing I'd say is, if you're taking deposits from people, I sure hope that you have a written contract that says, what are the rules? What happens with this deposit? If you take a deposit and then somebody says they're canceling and you don't have a written agreement that says, in the event of a cancellation within X period of time, your deposit will be forfeited, I think you're going to end up in trouble. Things like the state, Arizona Attorney General's office, they have a consumer fraud division that looks pretty negatively on just taking money from people and not giving it back, even if the good was not actually transferred or the service was not performed.
Gotcha.
I think, overall, those terms typically need to be reasonable. They can't just be punitive to the person who's giving you a deposit, that kind of thing. And it's very difficult, typically, for a business to demonstrate the harm that it caused them if there was a cancellation. For instance, it's difficult to show, we would have had another customer, but we let that one go based on yours. Now they've gone to another venue. I guess the bigger picture is, so let me back up. If you're gonna be doing this kind of business, okay, whether it's a wedding events, services for a wedding, whatever it is ever so much worth the money at the beginning to go to a highly reputable business contract lawyer and have them provide you with a draft contract that all of your customers have to sign, okay? And again, when you do that, I say, if you want to have somebody who has been doing that for a long time, they've seen a lot of cases come and go, they've adjusted their form, their template over the years. And if you do that at the beginning, it's an ounce of prevention beats a pound of cure kind of thing, right? I've seen, this is not what I do. I don't go write contracts. I'm the guy that gets involved when things have already gone off the rails. We've got a big fight going on. But I can tell you from the litigator's perspective, a guy who's been in all of these conflicts on each side for many years, I cannot count, I could not tell you the number, it's a very large number of those kind of cases that I've had, that if the client had spent $2,500 or whatever it would have cost them to get that contract written well by somebody really good at it at the beginning, they would have saved the money they spent on litigation a couple of years later, which was a lot more. Okay.
That makes sense. So what happens if someone, so let's say you have a cancellation clause in your contract and they cancel. Um, but in the contract it says, there's no cancellation. So you try to work with them and you say, look, let's reschedule you, but they just don't want to reschedule. They just want to cancel. And then you as a business, you say, I don't want, I can't cancel, right? This is the contract, right? This is what it is.
Right.
So they get mad at you, and then now they go, hey, I'm going to go charge back. I'm going to go to my credit card company. I'm going to charge this thing back. So that's one. And then what happens if they try to cancel and then they go online and start bashing you because they tried to cancel? So those two things, let's talk about that.
Yeah. Okay. So, I mean, they're both huge concerns, and both of them come down to, time and energy lost. And certainly somebody posting on, review websites can be business lost. And so what people really should be doing, business owners should be doing in those kind of circumstances, is one, being rational, not getting caught up in a back and forth with somebody that's emotional or personal in nature. And they should be looking at that big picture and saying, what's this going to cost me? And what do I have to gain? So, let's say it's a event site and it's a $500 deposit, right? And then somebody in the party's, the stepmom or whoever gets coronavirus, and they're calling to say, we got to cancel this because all the family members are going into lockdown, right? Everybody's staying home, self-quarantining. Okay, and your contract says, and it's, it's 8 days away, your contract says anything within 20 days, you lose your $500 deposit.
Yeah.
You got to ask yourself, what do I do in this world to get $500? And is it going to be worth everything I'm going to go through with these people, potentially, over this $500?
Yeah.
And most of the time it's not. You're going to come, you're not going to get to 2 hours with me and you'll have spent $500, you know? So do you really want to call me and talk about it? Probably not. When you have the ability of people to get online and get on the websites, get on the review websites, and to, in that situation, a person could do a pretty good job of making you as a business look bad and never say anything false, right?
Yeah, that's true.
So you have to ask yourself, how will I look to the rest of the world? And what am I buying for $500? If that was my brother-in-law and he's got his small business and he's asking me about that, I'd say, look, why don't you call that person back and say, I'm really sorry for your family. I'm going to send you your deposit back. It'd be great if you can give us a review for, the amount of time we've spent with you, and keep us in mind, we'll still be open next year.
Yeah.
That kind of thing. I mean, you can end up getting a great 5-star, 4-star, whatever it is, review, and some really kind words from somebody, by just, extending yourself a little bit. Mm-hmm. So that would be my advice a lot of the time.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's great advice. But what happens when a business can't do that, right? Because sometimes the reality is in small business is that as deposits come in, they're bootstrapping their business for the next thing. So then the event comes, and then you're okay at the event, you get the final payment for the event, you pay off all the people that are working the event, and so on and so on. It's just a cycle of money coming in and cycling through. Well, now you've lost thousands of dollars because all this stuff has just gone to crap. And now all of a sudden you've got 5, 6, 7 people calling you, hey, I want to cancel, I want to cancel, I want to cancel, I want my money back. And your contract that says, no cancellations.
Yeah.
I mean, how do you, going back to what you said, I think the reasonable response is, look, we'll take care of you. We'll figure out something, right?
Right.
But knowing in yourself, right, we're not going to be able to refund 8 people right now, right? So I don't
Right.
know. What are your
Yeah.
thoughts?
So again, I think it's always just better to look for, try to find, if you can, some creative way to deal with this that stays away from conflict and stays away from, in particular, having a legal conflict. Look, when it comes to these kinds of things, um, the one thing that you're always looking at if you're going into a legal conflict is both sides are paying a lawyer.
Yep.
So whatever you can get out of it, subtract from that the amount you're going to pay a lawyer to be involved. Um, you have to be at a fairly high level, right, in terms of the money involved before it makes sense to just say, oh, let's go and let's just file the lawsuit.
Yeah.
There are cases where you're at that level where the legal fees are not going to be a concern compared to the money involved.
Right.
And there are other cases where the problem that you're dealing with is so significant to your business that you need to pay the legal fees, because if you don't, it's going to diminish your business. It's going to harm your business really badly. But the kind of scenario that you're talking about, my advice is typically going to be, it's way better to figure out what you can do than just say, no, I can't do anything. And people, I think, in particular, when they're just dealing with a business owner, most people will deal pretty well with honesty, disclosure. Hey, I understand you want your money back. I have costs and overhead too. I had to pay these people. I had to pay my employees, whatever it was
Yeah.
that you got sunk into it. And then you say to them, well, what I can do is this. Our contract says I don't have to give you any money at all.
Yeah.
But what I can do is I can give you, half. And I can tell you that if you come back next year, I'll give you a good price when you go through with the reception then.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so I just think it's always better to try to work out a deal with
Find a
people.
solution. Yeah.
Find a
You
solution,
can't.
find a deal.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. That's what good business people do. They find deals.
Yep. Yep. It's good. So, and then finally, we were talking about the coronavirus, and you and I were talking the other day, and we were talking about, is this the new norm? And will businesses now need waivers dealing with viruses in the future for how they approach their contracts and with
Yeah.
people? So, for example, if you have an event, will they need a disclosure statement or some kind of waiver in their contract to say, look, we're not responsible for you getting sick if you come to our event, because you know, I think the paradigms have changed a little bit, right? So how does this flow in? How does this impact?
Yeah. It's it's a bit of a gray area. Um, what the new normal is, your guess is as good as mine. It certainly seems, as we sit here today, that uh, things are going to be dramatically changed um, on at least, a 1.5 to 2 year kind of time frame
Yeah.
for businesses, right?
Yep.
So it's pretty hard to imagine that we're back to full theaters and everybody out on the dance floor at once at the reception in less than a 1.5 or 2 years. I think that it's worth thinking about if you're a business owner and you do have events or you do the kind of services where you may come into contact with people in pretty immediate way. If you're doing caterings, this kind of thing,
Yep.
about whether you want to have a release of liability signed by those people as part of their agreement. Every state, again, has its own case law regarding what works and what doesn't work
Right.
with a release of liability form or assumption of risk form. There oftentimes, sort of disfavored. There's case law in Arizona about it basically says that the Constitution of Arizona makes it a question for a jury to decide whether somebody assumed the risk, and whether they did that in signing a form that said they were assuming the risk of doing this. They understood it, they knew it's a risk, and they assumed it. So the long and the short of it is, in having a waiver drafted, getting it signed, what people always say is, well, will this work? And,
Yeah.
and
Right.
what lawyers always say is, I'd have to do a little research. But really, or even more, well, it's kind of in the gray area.
Yeah.
And the fact is that with release of liability forms, there is a lot of gray area. What I have told people about that, though, is it's definitely going to be better to have one and have a good one signed than to have nothing.
Yeah.
Because even though there are some things that you can't get out of through a release form or an assumption of risk form, and it may still be a jury question, which means the release isn't going to automatically put you in a position where you just, you can't be sued. But it's still going to be a lot better if you end up getting sued and you're in front of a jury to have had them sign a form that says, yeah, we understand that there are risks. We understand you're going to be coming into my house and catering this event. Yeah. And we're taking on that risk. We want you to come in anyway. I think that generally, you look at the cases and so forth, juries are pretty fair and reasonable about their results in these kind of situations. Yeah. So better to have that piece of paper than to not have it. Going back though, we're talking about some of these conflicts before, and I don't think we really touched on it. It's popping into my head. I think one thing people are going to have to deal with now is, and at least in the short term, whether there's going to be people going on those websites, on the review websites, and making disparaging statements about a business related to the pandemic, right?
Interesting, yeah.
Yeah. What do you do about that?
Right.
You've always got to respond to both the communication itself or the posting itself, the review itself, right? And the person who reviewed it. And you've also got to be communicating with, responding to the people who are reading it. And those are probably the more important ones to be talking to when you're responding to that stuff. But I'm afraid we're gonna see some of that, because you always do,
Yeah, you will. You will. I mean, there's no question you will. But that's a great point, because a lot of times when someone attacks you, you want to defend yourself. But the way you should be looking at it is, when you're responding to everyone that could be reading this, not just that particular person. I think we forget that sometimes when, when people try to attack you, you forget that, right? You're trying to defend yourself against that particular person, and that's not the way you should be looking at it.
John McPhee had a book called A Sense of Where You Are, which was about Bill Bradley when he was a basketball player before he was a senator. And it was a quote, I think that's what we were talking about. It was a quote from Bradley as to how he could shoot so well with his back to the basket, because that's how he played. He was a big man. And he said, you just have to have a sense of where you are. And probably the best thing that somebody who is a litigator and has good experience and has been able to learn from their experience as a lawyer, the best thing they can do is tell you where you are, okay? Because, it's kind of like jujitsu. There are some situations where a person comes and attacks you, and even though your instinct may be to fight back, to
Yeah.
headbutt them, whatever it is,
Yeah.
it may be the very best thing to do to step aside, push them past, and let their own momentum carry them away. You
Yeah.
know, there are other situations in which you can assess rather quickly, if you have the experience to do it, that kind of sleight of hand move is not going to work here. This is going to require, a full bore response
Yeah.
right at the beginning. Sometimes it's a combination of the two, or it's somewhere in between those two. And developing and having a sense of what the situation is and which of the multitude of responses you can take.
Yeah.
That's the thing I have tried to work on most over this last 20 years and learn, in particular, from my own mistakes. How could I have done that better? How could I have represented or advised the client better about whether to go right into this guns a-blazing, whether to take a more subtle approach. And over time, I think that, for the commercial kind of cases, 90% of the time, if you've had a good deal of experience, you're going to look at it and say, this is not the one that you want to fight on all the way to the end.
Yeah.
That's a once in a while thing.
Mm-hmm.
It's not an everyday.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Brian, thanks so much for doing this. I appreciate your time.
You got it. Thanks, Shane. Take
All right,
care.
man. All
Be
right.
safe.
Have a good one. Hey, thanks for checking out this episode. I hope that you found it helpful. Please share it with other people. Also, if you're getting married or you work in the wedding industry, I would love to interview and share your information with other people. Send me a text, 520-399-8580, or shoot me an email at letschat@wedding.report.